David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, Chapter 16, I am a new boy in more senses than one. Next morning after breakfast, I entered on school life again. I went, accompanied by Mr. Wickfield, to the scene of my future studies, a grave building in a courtyard with a learned air about it, and was introduced to my new master. Dr. Strong looked almost as rusty to my thinking as the tall iron rails and gates outside the house. He was in his library with his clothes not particularly well brushed, and his hair not particularly well combed, his knee-smalls unbraced, his long black gaiters unbuttoned, and his shoes yawning like two caverns on the hearth rug, turning upon me a lustreless eye that reminded me of a long-forgotten blind old horse who once used to crop the grass and tumble over the graves in Blunderstone churchyard. He said he was glad to see me, but sitting at work, not far off from Dr. Strange, was a very pretty young lady, whom he called Annie, and who was his daughter, I supposed, who got me out of my difficulty by kneeling down to put Dr. Strong's shoes on and buttoned his gaiters, which she did with great cheerfulness and quickness. When she had finished, and we were going to the schoolroom, I was much surprised to hear Mr. Wickfield, in bidding her good morning, address her as Mrs. Strong. The schoolroom was a pretty large hall on the quietest side of the house. About 25 boys were studiously engaged in their books when we went in, but they rose to give the doctor good morning. "A new boy, young gentleman," said the doctor. "Trotwood Copperfield." One Adams, who was the head boy, then stepped out of his place and welcomed me. He looked like a young clergyman in his white cravat, but he was very affable and good-humored, and showed me my place and presented me to the masters in a gentlemanly way that would have put me at ease, if anything could. As I went to my airy old room at Wickfield's, the grave shadow of the staircase seemed to fall upon my doubts and fears, and to make the past more indistinct. I sat there, sturdily conning my books, until dinner time. We were out of school for good at 3, and went down, hopeful of becoming a passable sort of boy yet. When we had dined, we went upstairs again, where everything went on exactly as on the previous day. Mr. Wickfield sat down to drink, and drank a good deal. Agnes played the piano for him, sat by him, and worked and talked, and played some games at dominoes with me. The time having come for her withdrawal for the night, and she having left us, I gave Mr. Wickfield my hand, preparatorily giving away myself, but he checked me and said, "Should you like to stay with us, Trotwood, or go elsewhere?" "To stay," I answered quickly. "Stay with us, Trotwood, eh?" he said. "I'm glad of it. You are company to us both. It is wholesome to have you here, wholesome for me and wholesome for Agnes, wholesome perhaps for all of us." "I'm sure it is for me, sir," I said. "I am so glad to be here." "That's a fine fellow," said Mr. Wickfield. "As long as you are glad to be here, you shall stay here." I thanked him for his consideration, and he went down soon afterwards. Seeing a light in the little round office, and immediately feeling myself attracted toward Uriah Heep, who had a sort of fascination for me, I went in there. I found Uriah reading a great fat book, with such demonstrative attention that his lank forefinger followed up every line he read and made clammy tracks along the page, or so I fully believed, like a snail. "You are working late tonight, Uriah," says I. "Yes, Master Copperfield," says Uriah. As I was getting on the stool opposite to talk to him more conveniently, I observed that he had not such a thing as a smile about him, and that he could only widen his mouth to make 2 hard creases down the cheeks, one on each side, to stand for one. "I am not doing office work, Master Copperfield," said Uriah. "What work, then?" I asked. "I am improving my legal knowledge, Master Copperfield," said Uriah. "I am going through Tidd's practice. Oh, what a writer Mr. Tidd is, Master Copperfield." I observed that his nostrils, which were thin and pointed, with sharp dints in them, had a singular and most uncomfortable way of expanding and contracting themselves, that they seemed to twinkle instead of his eyes, which hardly ever twinkled at all. "I suppose you are quite a great lawyer," I said, after looking at him some time. "Me, Master Copperfield," said Uriah. "Oh, no, I am a very humble person." It was no fancy of mine about his hands, I observed, for he frequently ground the palms against each other as if to squeeze them dry and warm, besides often wiping them in a stealthy way on his pocket handkerchief. "I am well aware I am the humblest person going," said Uriah Heep modestly. "Let the other be where he may. My mother is likewise a very humble person. We live in an humble abode, Master Copperfield, but have much to be thankful for. My father's former calling was humble. He was sexton." "What is he now?" I asked. "He is a partaker of glory at present, Master Copperfield," said Uriah Heep, "but we have much to be thankful for. How much I have to be thankful for in living with Mr. Wickfield." I asked Uriah if he had been with Mr. Wickfield long. "I have been with him going on 4 years, Master Copperfield," said Uriah, shutting up his book after carefully marking the place where he had left off. "Since a year after my father's death. How much I have to be thankful for in that. How much I have to be thankful for in Mr. Wickfield's kind intention to give me my articles, which would otherwise not lay within the humble means of mother and self. Then when your articled time is over, you'll be a regular lawyer, I suppose," said I. "With the blessings of Providence, Master Copperfield," returned Uriah. "Perhaps you'll be a partner in Mr. Wickfield's business one of these days," I said, to make myself agreeable, "and it will be Wickfield and Heep, or Heep late Wickfield." "Oh, no, Master Copperfield," returned Uriah, shaking his head. "I am much too humble for that." He certainly did look uncommonly like the carved face on the beam outside my window, as he sat in his humility, eyeing me sideways, with his mouth widened and creases in his cheeks. "Mr. Wickfield is a most excellent man, Master Copperfield," said Uriah. "If you have known him long, you know it, I am sure, much better than I can inform you." I replied that I was certain he was, but that I had not known him long myself, though he was a friend of my aunt's. "Oh, indeed, Master Copperfield," said Uriah. "Your aunt is a sweet lady, Master Copperfield." He had a way of writhing when he wanted to express enthusiasm, which diverted my attention from the compliment he had paid my relation to the snaky twistings of his throat and body. "A sweet lady, Master Copperfield," said Uriah Heep. "She has a great admiration for Miss Agnes, Master Copperfield, I believe." "Everyone must have," I returned. "Oh, thank you, Master Copperfield," said Uriah Heep, "for that remark. It is so true. Humble as I am, I know it is so true. Oh, thank you, Master Copperfield." He writhed himself quite off his stool in the excitement of his feelings, and, being off, began to make arrangements for getting home. "Mother will be expecting me," he said, referring to a pale and expressive-faced watch in his pocket, "and getting uneasy, for though we are humble, Master Copperfield, we are much attached to one another. If you would come and see us any afternoon, and take a cup of tea at our lovely dwelling, Mother would be as proud of your company as I should be." I said I should be glad to come. "Thank you, Master Copperfield," returned Uriah, putting his book away upon the shelf. "I suppose you stop here sometime, Master Copperfield?" I said I was going to be brought up there, I believed, as long as I remained at school. "Oh, indeed!" exclaimed Uriah. "I should think you would come into the business at last, Master Copperfield." I promised that I had no views of that sort, and that no such scheme was entertained on my behalf by anybody. But Uriah insisted on blandly replying to all my assurances. "Oh, yes, Master Copperfield, I should think you would indeed. And oh, indeed, Master Copperfield, I should think you would certainly," over and over again. Being at last ready to leave the office for the night, he asked me if it would suit my convenience to have the light put out, and on my answering yes, instantly extinguished it. After shaking hands with me, his hand felt like a fish in the dark. He opened the door into the street a very little and crept out and shut it, leaving me to grope my way back into the house, which cost me some trouble and to fall over his stool. In less than a fortnight I was quite at home and happy among my new companions. Dr. Strong's was an excellent school, as different from Mr. Creakle's as good is from evil. It was on a sound system with an appeal in everything to the honor and good faith of the boys, which worked wonders. We all felt that we had a part in the management of the place and in sustaining its character and dignity. We had noble games out of hours and plenty of liberty, but even then, as I remember, we were well spoken of in town, and rarely did any disgrace, by our appearance or manner, to the reputation of Dr. Strong and Dr. Strong's boys. Some of the higher scholars boarded in the doctor's house, and through them I learned at second hand some particulars of the doctor's history, as how he had not yet been married 12 months to the beautiful young lady I had seen in the study. Also, how the doctor's cogitating manner was attributable to his being always engaged in looking out for Greek roots, which, in my innocence and ignorance, I supposed to be a botanical furor on the doctor's part, especially as he always looked at the ground when he walked about, until I understood that they were roots of words, with a view to a new dictionary which he had in contemplation. Adams, our head boy, who had a turn for mathematics, had made a calculation I was informed of the time this dictionary would take in completing, and on the doctor's plan and the doctor's rate of going, he considered it might be done in 1,649 years, counting from the doctor's last, or 62nd birthday. And that is the end of chapter 16.